we'll start with going back to the beginning. So what were some of the films that inspired you to become a filmmaker?
So I'm actually a kid from the TV age. So it was an absolute fluke that I just knew that I wanted to do something with drama and playwriting, which I got into at primary school, and something with art. So my big brother, who went to Swinburne to do commerce, told Mum and Dad that there was this art school there. So we all tromped along on open day, and I went,
This is it.
I want to go here. I saw these student films, they're all black and white, they were like rock clips, you know, cool people running around in lanes with white faces, and I'm like, yeah, I want to do that.
What were things like for women in film back then?
Well, first of all, Australia didn't have a film industry. And I think it's really, really important that we remember how important government support of the arts is. Basically, the reason there were these wonderful women directing, they were the McDonough sisters in the 1930s. Australia had a really active film industry, film stars. There was Raymond Longford and Charles Chauvel and Lottie Lyle. And when the American distributors bought up the cinema chains and stopped Australian films from being screened here, our industry collapsed. And all that talent went. Most of it went to Hollywood. Mia Farrow's father, John Farrow, was an Australian director. So yes, an incredible lot of talent that all went offshore. So in all those years, I mean, when I was studying film and TV, I mean, it was this little course, part of the art school that I went to, where I sort of finally realised after 4 years, actually, maybe that's what I could be good at. I went to see the first Australian film I had ever seen in a cinema. It was Tim Burstall's film. And I was just like, oh, this is so weird. Australian voices. That doesn't feel like a real film. I mean, everyone forgets. It wasn't that long ago that we had no film industry, and it was really thanks to the efforts of people like Philip Adams, Barry Jones, who lobbied the government. It was John Gorton, who set up an Australian Film Commission to say, you know, we're fighting this big, dominant Hollywood monster, and if we want our films with our stories, we actually need government support and help. And that's how it all started.
So at the time, did you not think a woman could be the director?
We had no role models. There were no women directors. First of all, there were no Australian directors at all, and no women directors, and there were no women directors in the whole world that I knew of until, you know, as I started studying, and that was one of the best things about, we started seeing international cinema, and then I saw Lena Wertmüller, who was Fellini's script assistant, who went on to make some amazing films. She's the only other woman who's been nominated for an Oscar, apart from Catherine Bigelow and Jane Campion.
What are the barriers that women have to smash through?
I'll tell this story, I've told it many times, but I think it's worth remembering. So when we all sent our applications off to the ABC in Melbourne, all the boys got interviews in camera, sound, stage management, editing. I got a letter, even though I had my little final film, The Roof Needs Mowing. My letter said, please report to the typing pool. If you're interested in working with our ABC, women start in the typing pool. I had never learnt to type, and basically I thought after that, yeah, I was like, forget it, thank you very much. And I never, ever went back to the ABC. Yeah. So that's how it was different for women. I mean, and that was nearly 40 years ago, I've got to say.
In terms of film, it's 15% of directors and 23% of writers. So according to Screen Australia's analysis of film shot over the past 5 years, so we're talking 2010 to 2015, women account for 33% of producers, 15% of directors and 23% of writers. The number of directors has actually gone down since the 90s, and it's even worse in Hollywood.
Well, it's always been worse in Hollywood. When I first went to Hollywood, I was I was a freak. I mean, I was a freak in Australia there because it's a really old industry. I mean, I realised in Australia, because we were government funded and a lot of the people it was arts funded, so they were more liberal and they were like, but when I got to Hollywood, I mean, I had meetings with studio executives because, I was hot, Brilliant Career was a huge hit, who couldn't look me in the face. They'd been sent out because if you're hot, they've all got to buy up the next young talent. They couldn't even physically eyeball me because they were so humiliated that they had to beg a young woman to come and work for their studio. So that's Hollywood.
But do you think that men have an ego that allows them to go out and sell themselves easier, and that women need to kind of step up to the plate on that?
I absolutely agree with you. I think maybe we need to run courses for women. I think they go in to pitch something and they'll say, oh yes, I think I can do that. Whereas a guy would just go, yes, I can do that. They know how to sell themselves, and we're too honest. The girls have got to learn the bullshit.
But do you think it's because movie companies, they often argue that they're catering to, the big money markets, which is teenage boys? That's how they see it. How do you see it?
You just have to go, well, you know what? I can make those films, but I don't want to. I think it would be really boring. I don't watch them. Occasionally I go out to see how visual effect world is changing. But I'm much more interested in richer, more complicated stories. So, but the thing, I had this conversation once with Meryl Streep. She was in Sydney promoting Mamma Mia. And she said, I'm on the plane, doing that, hitting every capital city in 4 days because I'm here to promote that film because I want to prove that women's films can make as much money. And Jackie, I've got to say, as much as I love George Miller and how thrilled I am that, Fury Road was such a hit because he'd spent, so many years of his life, I was so thrilled that Pitch Perfect 2 made as much money as Fury Road.
Yeah. You've been vocal about imposing quotas to get more women in film. Why do you think that's really important?
Well, it's not... I don't necessarily think it has to be a quota, but I think it has to be a target. And there was this sort of wonderful line, and it was about, for something to matter, it has to be counted. And what the Film Action Group that our Directors Guild formed last year, after these figures came out, and I happened to say to the president, this is shocking. It's obviously not a level playing field. We should do something. And boom, there was this action group. And the research came from the Swedish Film Institute. Swedish Film Institute, which like Australia, a small country, so they have government funding assistance for film and television and so on. They decided, the woman who ran it decided she was going to set a target. It was going to be 5 or 6 years. To hopefully it would finally be 50-50. And they thought it would be a slow thing. She said in 2.5 years, the number of women directing had gone up to 45%.
How do you feel about being held up as the voice of women in film?
I hated it for many, many years. Many, many years. I actually said to even call me a woman director is sexist. Could you please just, and why should we all be the same? And to even think why should my films only be about women? And you don't, you target your questions differently to me than to a male director, where you just be talking about their work. You focus on how I treat the male characters on screen if I've done it, if you think it's negative. And I really I had so many interviews where I just said, would you please just talk about me as a director, please? Because my work is different to Jane Campion's work. I'm not the woman director who wants to make women's films. I'm not here to do ads for the feminist industry.
You've mostly worked in Australia, but you've been in Hollywood. What brought you back to Australia? Why did you decide to live here or come here?
There's a point where you have to decide what nationality you want your children to be. And also as a working mother, I thought, well, I better do the first one in Australia because it's just there's much less stress than like working with those huge studios. But I wanted my girls to grow up in Australia. I wanted them to be Australians, living in America and living in London and Canada and the other places where I've made the films. I did decide that there's something, the thing that you miss when you're away is our wonderful dry sense of humour, and that thing where we've got our feet on the ground. And I thought I want that to be part of my daughter's life. I do want them to grow up in this country and to, you know, do all the stuff that we all did, go to the beach. Yeah. So, yeah. So I came back so I could have some Australians.
Got any guilty pleasures when it comes to film?
Well, my guilty pleasure is TV. That I do like watching the Border Patrol. I think it's because I travelled so much and I'm always standing in a line and I'm wondering who everybody is and what they've got in their suitcase. So I love watching it. So that's my guilty pleasure.
Okay. What would you be doing if you weren't a filmmaker?
If I wasn't a filmmaker, maybe should I have been a photographer or should I have been a psychologist? I am interested in human behaviour.
What's the last film you watched?
Oh, I saw a French film at the French Film Festival. I cannot remember the title, but it was so French because it was like this sort of middle-aged man having this sort of nervous breakdown, and he was going to kayaks up a river, and where he stops, there's the most beautiful women are running this lodge, and the waitress is beautiful, and they all seem to fancy him, even though he's sort of chubby and balding. It definitely was a French male director's fantasy.
Happiest memory?
I think it's probably childhood's at the beach. Yeah.
Let's go back to what's one film you'd wish you'd made?
I wished I'd made Bicycle Thieves. It's an Italian neorealist film by De Sica. Or I could say that I wished that I'd made To Kill a Mockingbird, which was the film that affected me most as a child.
Oh, why?
I actually think, now I realise it was beautifully made. Then I know Dad dragged us along because we learnt about that the world's not all good, and there's a thing called racism. And I did develop a huge crush on Gregory Peck. But I think that film put a lot of things that I care about, so did Bicycle Thieves, together. It's a human story, but it's slightly poetic. It's great performances, beautifully cast, like, you know, we all wanted to call our daughter Scout. If only Demi Moore hadn't done it, I would have done it. So it's a mix of both. It's a powerful story, it's got humanist, social content, and it stays with you.
Did I ask you, who were some of your female role models in the field? Did you have anyone to look up to?
Oh, female role models. Well, I think probably my greatest role model was Germaine Greer. I think that, the whole feminist revolution happened when I was at art school, and reading The Female Eunuch made me, realise, oh my God, yeah, no, we're not equal, and, all these things that have happened. And because she was Australian and she was so sort of sexy and hip, she was, definitely our star.
Do you think that audiences are being underestimated, I suppose, in their acceptance?
I think audiences are always underestimated. I sit in meetings with executives who talk about them. They won't understand that, or they'll be unhappy, or this won't be clear to them. And I don't think people are as stupid as executives think, or as narrow. And I've got to say that when we made My Brilliant Career, when the whole thing about it that was revolutionary was at the end, our lead character decides to turn down the handsome man and say, I don't want to be married. We had huge pressure from the investors, male, who said, women won't like this. This is a woman's film, and women want to see things with everyone ending up happily ever after with the handsome leading man. And I have to say, I said to the head of Greater Union at that time, I said, I think they will. I mean, we compromised. We added one little line where she said, sort of, not now. So I said, for the romantics, they could imagine that Sibylla, in many years later, sees Harry in Paris across the street. But I've got to say, when we screened our cut for the film, he turned to me and he said, and our ending is, you know, she says, no, go away, and she ends up writing the book and so on, and you see she gets the book, and my wonderful male editor had triumphant music. The book was basically better than Harry. He said, you're right, and there was no question. But it was a man making the judgment about what women want. And that's why we need more women in power telling our stories and running studios and putting the money up to tell our stories for our daughters.